I was on a flight to the most important job interview of my life when a 6-year-old girl started having a complete meltdown in the seat across from me. Her terrified crying was filling the entire cabin, and nothing her mother tried was working. That's when I pulled out a simple piece of paper and began folding it into a crane, not knowing that this small act of kindness would lead me back to the woman who had saved my life 20 years earlier. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. And please subscribe for more stories that celebrate the lasting impact of human kindness. Now, let me take you back to that turbulent flight that changed everything. My name is Nick Foster, and I was 28 years old when I found myself on Flight 447 from Denver to Chicago, clutching a folder containing my portfolio and trying not to think about how much this interview meant to me. I was flying to meet with the creative director at Daves & Associates, one of the most prestigious graphic design firms in the country. After years of freelancing and struggling to make ends meet, this was my shot at the career I'd always dreamed of. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was nervous about this interview. 20 years ago, I had been a child so paralyzed by anxiety that I could barely speak in class. The transformation from that scared little boy to a confident professional hadn't happened overnight. It had been a long journey of small victories and gradual healing. I'd been preparing for this Daves & Associates interview for months, perfecting my presentation, researching the company's client base and design philosophy, practicing answers to every possible question they might ask. My portfolio contained 5 years of my best work: logos, branding packages, website designs, and print campaigns that I was genuinely proud of. But as I sat in seat 14C, watching the clouds drift past the window, I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in my chest that had been my companion since childhood. To calm my nerves, I did what I had been doing for 20 years. I pulled a small square of origami paper from my wallet and began folding it. It was a habit I'd developed as a child, something that had gotten me through countless difficult moments. The repetitive motions, the precise creases, the transformation of something flat and ordinary into something three-dimensional and beautiful, it never failed to center me. I always carried origami paper with me, in my wallet, in my laptop bag, in the glove compartment of my car. It had become as essential to me as my keys or my phone. Over the years, I'd folded thousands of cranes, flowers, boxes, and animals. I'd taught the art to friends, to nieces and nephews, to anyone who seemed like they might benefit from the meditative practice of creation. But I'd never forgotten where it all began. I was halfway through folding a crane when I heard it. The sound of a child in distress. Not just crying, but the kind of panicked, inconsolable sobbing that cuts through every other noise and makes everyone within earshot feel helpless and uncomfortable. I looked up to see a little girl, maybe 6 years old, in the seat across the aisle from me. She was curled up in a ball, her small body shaking with sobs, while a woman who was clearly her mother tried desperately to comfort her. The child's face was red and streaked with tears, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps that suggested she was working herself into a full anxiety attack. "Shh, Nancy, it's okay," the woman was saying, her voice strained with worry and exhaustion. "We're safe. The plane is safe. Remember what we talked about?" But Nancy was beyond hearing rational words. She was lost in whatever fear had taken hold of her, and her cries were getting louder, more desperate. I could see other passengers starting to look annoyed, some shooting irritated glances in their direction, others putting on headphones or burying their faces deeper in their books and magazines. A flight attendant had come over and was speaking in hushed tones with the mother, clearly trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The mother's face was flushed with embarrassment and concern. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been dealing with this level of distress for a long time. There was something in her expression that I recognized, the helpless frustration of an adult who desperately wants to help a child but doesn't know how to reach them through their fear. I knew that feeling intimately. I remembered being that scared child, overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't control or understand. I remembered the way adults would look at me during my panic attacks, some with pity, some with irritation, most with a kind of helpless confusion. And I remembered the rare adults who had the patience and wisdom to meet me where I was, rather than where they thought I should be. Without really thinking about it, I stood up and approached their row. The flight attendant looked at me with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Excuse me," I said gently to the mother. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I might be able to help." The woman looked up at me with desperate, grateful eyes. She was probably in her 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the kind of face that suggested she was used to taking care of others. She had laugh lines around her eyes and the patient expression of someone who worked with children, though right now that patience was clearly being tested. There was something familiar about her, though I couldn't place what it was. "Please," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I'll try anything. She's been like this since we boarded. She's new to our family, and flying is very scary for her." I knelt down in the aisle so I was at Nancy's eye level. She was still crying, but I could see her peeking at me through her fingers. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was also a flicker of curiosity about this stranger who was suddenly paying attention to her. "Hi, Nancy," I said softly, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I can see you're really scared right now." She nodded, hiccuping through her tears, her small chest still heaving with the effort of crying. "You know what? I get scared sometimes too. And when I do, I have something that always helps me feel better. Would you like to see?" Nancy nodded again, her crying starting to quiet just a little. I could feel the attention of nearby passengers focusing on us, but I kept my attention entirely on the frightened little girl in front of me. I held up the half-finished crane I'd been working on. This is called origami. It's the art of folding paper into beautiful shapes. It comes from Japan, and it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Watch this. With slow, deliberate movements, I continued folding the crane, narrating each step in a calm, soothing voice. "First, we make this fold here like we're tucking the paper into bed. See how gentle we have to be? The paper wants to cooperate with us, only if we're patient and careful." Nancy's crying had stopped completely now. She was watching my hands with fascination, her fear temporarily forgotten in the wonder of watching something magical happen right in front of her. "Now we flip it over and do the same thing on the other side," I continued. "Origami is all about symmetry, making sure both sides match. It teaches us patience, because if we rush, we might tear the paper or make a crooked fold." I could see Nancy's breathing starting to slow down, her body beginning to relax as she focused on the rhythmic movements of my hands. "This next part is a little tricky," I said, making an inside reverse fold. "We have to push this part in, like we're turning it inside out. It might seem impossible at first, but if we're gentle and persistent, the paper will do exactly what we want it to do." "How do you know how to do that?" Nancy asked, her voice small but no longer panicked. "I learned when I was about your age," I said. "I was a pretty scared kid too, and someone very special taught me that when we feel overwhelmed, we can create something beautiful with our hands. It helps our minds focus on something positive instead of something scary." "Now comes my favorite part," I said, gently pulling the crane's wings apart. "We give it life." The paper crane seemed to bloom in my hands, transforming from a flat, folded shape into something that looked like it might actually fly. Nancy's eyes went wide with amazement, and I heard a few appreciative murmurs from the passengers who had been watching. "It's beautiful," Nancy whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch one of the crane's wings. "Would you like to learn how to make one?" Nancy nodded eagerly, and I pulled another square of paper from my wallet, a piece of bright yellow origami paper that seemed to glow under the airplane's fluorescent lights. For the next 45 minutes, I sat in the aisle of that airplane, teaching a frightened little girl how to fold her first origami crane. Her mother watched with tears in her eyes as Nancy's fear melted away, replaced by concentration and wonder. The flight attendants, initially concerned about me blocking the aisle, quickly realized that what was happening was more important than airline regulations. "Like this?" Nancy asked, showing me her attempt at the first fold. "Perfect," I said. "You're a natural at this. See how you made that crease nice and sharp? That's exactly right." Other passengers had stopped what they were doing to watch. What had started as an annoying disruption had become something beautiful, a moment of connection and learning that seemed to calm the entire cabin. I noticed people putting away their phones and books, choosing instead to witness this small miracle of transformation. "The secret to good origami," I told Nancy as we worked through the more complex folds, "is to be patient with yourself. If you make a mistake, you don't throw the paper away, you figure out how to work with what you have. Sometimes the most beautiful creations come from happy accidents." Nancy was completely absorbed in the process now, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she carefully lined up the edges of her folds. Her mother was watching with an expression of wonder and gratitude that made my chest tight with emotion. "This is hard," Nancy said, struggling with a particularly tricky fold. "It is hard," I agreed. "But you know what? You're doing it anyway. That's what brave people do. They keep trying even when something is difficult." "Am I brave?" she asked, looking up at me with those wide, trusting eyes. "I think you're one of the bravest people I know," I said seriously. "You got on an airplane even though it scared you. You're learning something new even though it's challenging. And you're not giving up even when it gets frustrating. That's the definition of brave." By the time Nancy finished her crane, she was beaming with pride. It wasn't perfect, the proportions were a little off, and one wing was slightly crumpled, but it was hers, created by her own hands through patience and determination. "I made this," she said, holding it up for her mother to see, her voice filled with amazement at her own accomplishment. "You certainly did, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's absolutely beautiful." As the captain announced our initial descent into Chicago, I returned to my seat, but not before Nancy's mother followed me. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "I'm Daniela, by the way, and what you just did? That was incredible. Where did you learn to do that?" "I learned when I was about Nancy's age," I said. "I was a pretty anxious kid, and my third-grade teacher taught me origami as a way to calm down and focus. It changed my life, honestly." Daniela's expression shifted slightly, something flickering in her eyes that I couldn't quite identify. "Your third-grade teacher taught you origami?" "Yeah, Actually, I think it was Miss Bell back then. This was about 20 years ago, in Springfield Elementary in Colorado." Daniela went very still, her face paling slightly. "Springfield Elementary? You know it?" I taught there for 30 years, she said, slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you say your name was?" "Nick Foster. Well, Nicholas Foster, but everyone called me Nick." I watched as recognition dawned on Daniela's face, her eyes widening with shock and something that looked like joy and disbelief all mixed together. "Nikki," she whispered. "Little Nikki Foster, who used to sit in the back corner and barely spoke above a whisper." It was my turn to be shocked. The familiar feeling I'd had about her suddenly made sense. Miss Bell? I go by my married name now, Daniela Stone, but yes. Oh my God, Nikki, I can't believe it's you. We stared at each other for a moment, both of us trying to process this impossible coincidence. The shy, anxious 8-year-old boy and the patient teacher who had changed his life, reunited on an airplane 20 years later. "You remember me?" I asked, still hardly believing it. "Remember you? Nikki, you were one of the students I thought about most over the years. You were so bright, so creative, but so scared of everything. You barely spoke in class, and you'd have these panic attacks." The memories came flooding back with startling clarity. I had been that scared kid, overwhelmed with anxiety that I didn't understand and couldn't control. School had been a daily struggle, every interaction a potential source of terror. I remember sitting in the back corner of Miss Bell's classroom, trying to make myself invisible, hoping no one would call on me or notice me. "I remember the first time you taught me origami," I said. "I'd had a meltdown during math class, and you kept me inside during recess." "You were so upset," Daniela remembered, settling into the empty seat next to me as other passengers prepared for landing. "You said you felt stupid because you couldn't understand fractions, and you were convinced everyone thought you were weird. And you pulled out that square of paper and said, 'Let me show you something magical.' You took to it immediately," she said, smiling at the memory. "Your hands were so steady, so precise, and for the first time since I'd known you, you looked peaceful." I thought about that moment, how it had felt to create something beautiful with my own hands, how the repetitive folding had quieted the chaos in my mind. It had been like discovering a secret language that my brain understood instinctively. "You started bringing me origami paper every day after that," I continued, "during lunch, during free time, whenever I looked like I was getting overwhelmed. It was the only thing that seemed to help," Daniela said. "You'd fold cranes and flowers and boxes, and with each creation you seemed to gain a little more confidence. Other kids started noticing your work, asking you to teach them. It was the first time I saw you really interact with your classmates." "You have no idea what that meant to me," I said, my voice getting thick with emotion. "Those origami sessions, they didn't just teach me a skill. They taught me that I could create something beautiful, that my hands could make something worthwhile. They gave me a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic." "I remember the day you brought me that complex dragon you'd folded at home," Daniela said. "You were so proud, and you should have been. It was incredibly intricate for an 8-year-old. I worked on it for 3 hours, I remembered. My mom thought I was obsessed, but I wanted to show you that I could do something really difficult." "That was the day I knew you were going to be okay," Daniela said softly. "I could see the confidence building in you, the way you were starting to believe in your own abilities." Daniela's eyes were bright with tears. "I always wondered what happened to you. You moved away at the end of that year, and I never got to see how you turned out." "My dad got transferred to Denver. I was devastated to leave your class." "You were the first teacher who really saw me, who understood that I wasn't just a difficult kid. I was a scared kid who needed a different kind of help." "And look at you now," she said, gesturing to my professional attire and the portfolio case at my feet. "What do you do?" "I became a graphic designer. I'm actually on my way to a job interview right now, the biggest opportunity of my career, and it all started with those origami paper cranes you taught me to fold." "How so?" "The patience, the attention to detail, the understanding that something beautiful can come from something simple, those are the foundations of good design. But more than that, origami taught me that I had value, that I could contribute something meaningful to the world. It gave me the confidence to pursue art, to believe that my creativity mattered. We talked for the rest of the flight, catching up on 20 years of life. Daniela told me about her career, how she had specialized in working with anxious and struggling children, how she had developed programs that incorporated art therapy into traditional education. She told me about her marriage to Kyle Stone, a fellow teacher, and how they had spent their careers working together to help children who didn't fit the traditional mold. After you left, I started using origami with other students. I saw how powerful it had been for you, and I wanted to share that gift with other children who were struggling. Over the years, I probably taught hundreds of kids to fold paper cranes. "That's incredible," I said. "You turned one small intervention into a whole teaching philosophy." You were my inspiration for that. Watching you transform from a scared, silent child into someone who could create beautiful things and share them with others, that showed me the real power of art as a healing tool. She told me about her retirement 2 years earlier, how she had struggled to find purpose after leaving the classroom that had been her life for 3 decades. And then she told me about Nancy, who she had recently adopted after the little girl had been through a series of difficult foster placements.
"She's been through so much trauma," Daniela explained, glancing back at Nancy, who was now peacefully coloring in a book, her paper crane sitting proudly on her tray table. Her birth parents were addicts who neglected her terribly. She's been in and out of foster homes since she was 3. The anxiety, the fear of abandonment, the difficulty trusting adults, it's all textbook trauma response. "And you haven't taught her origami yet?" "I haven't done origami in years," Daniela admitted with a rueful smile. "After I retired, I guess I just forgot about it. I was so focused on helping Nancy with her immediate needs, therapy, medical care, getting her enrolled in school, that I didn't think about the tools that had worked so well with other children. But watching you with Nancy today reminded me of why I started using it in the first place. The way her whole body relaxed when she started folding, the way her breathing slowed down, the pride in her eyes when she finished her crane. It was exactly what I used to see with my students." I looked over at Nancy, who was still clutching her paper crane and showing it proudly to the passenger next to her. "She's a natural, just like I was. Just like you were. And just like dozens of other children I worked with over the years. There's something about the process of creation, the meditative quality of the folding, that speaks to anxious minds." As the plane began its final descent into Chicago, I felt a profound sense of completion, as if a circle that had been open for 20 years was finally closing. The scared little boy who had learned to fold paper cranes had grown into a man who could pass that gift on to another frightened child. "Daniela, I want you to know something. What you did for me, it wasn't just about teaching me origami. You saw a scared, anxious kid who felt worthless, and you gave me a way to see my own value. You taught me that my hands could create beauty, that my mind could focus and achieve something meaningful. You did that yourself, Nikki. I just gave you the paper." "No," I said firmly. "You gave me so much more than paper. You gave me hope. You gave me a tool for managing my anxiety that I still use today. You gave me the foundation for my entire career. Most importantly, you gave me the understanding that even when everything feels chaotic and overwhelming, I can still breathe and just be present and creating." Daniela was crying now, and so was I. I became a teacher because I believed that small moments could change lives. But I never imagined I'd get to see the proof of that belief 20 years later. Every design I create, every project I work on, every time I help a client solve a visual problem, it all traces back to that first paper crane you taught me to fold. You didn't just teach me a craft. You taught me that transformation is possible, that beauty can emerge from the simplest materials, and that with patience and care, anything can be made into something magnificent. Nikki, seeing the man you've become, seeing how you pass that gift on to Nancy, that's the greatest reward any teacher could ask for. As we gathered our belongings and prepared to leave the plane, Nancy ran over to me with her paper crane, her face glowing with pride and excitement. "Mr. Nick, will you teach me how to make more animals?
Can you show me how to make a butterfly or a flower? I'd love to, I said, kneeling down to her level. But you know what? Your mom, I looked at Daniela, who nodded encouragingly, your mom is an even better teacher than I am. She's the one who taught me everything I know about origami. Nancy looked at Daniela with wonder and excitement. You know how to make paper animals too? I do, Daniela said, smiling through her tears, and I think it's time I remembered how to teach them again. As we walked through the airport together, I thought about the incredible journey that had brought us to this moment. A scared little boy, a patient teacher, and a simple piece of paper had created a connection that transcended time and distance. I thought about my upcoming interview, about the portfolio in my bag filled with designs that traced their lineage back to those first paper cranes. I thought about Nancy, who was already asking Daniela to teach her how to make a flower. I thought about the ripple effects of kindness, how one teacher's patience with an anxious child had created waves that were still spreading 20 years later. We exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch. As I watched Daniela and Nancy walk away, Nancy's small hand clutching her paper crane while she chattered excitedly about all the things she wanted to learn to make, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the mysterious ways that life brings us full circle. The job interview went better than I could have imagined. When the creative director, a sharp woman named Laura Daves, asked me about my design philosophy, I found myself talking about origami, about the beauty of transformation, about how the most powerful art comes from taking something simple and revealing its hidden potential. Tell me more about that, she said, leaning forward with genuine interest. How does paper folding relate to graphic design? Both are about seeing possibilities that others might miss, I explained, pulling out a piece of origami paper from my wallet. When most people look at a flat square of paper, they see limitations. But when you understand the principles of folding, you see infinite potential. I began folding as I talked, my hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. Good design is the same way. A client comes to you with a problem. They need a logo, or a website, or a marketing campaign. To them, it might seem impossible, overwhelming. But when you understand the principles of visual communication, you can see the solution hidden in the problem. She watched, fascinated, as the crane took shape in my hands. The process requires patience, precision, and the ability to see several steps ahead. You have to understand how each fold affects the whole, how every decision you make early on will impact the final result. And if you make a mistake? She asked. You adapt, I said, deliberately making a slightly imperfect fold and then incorporating it into the design. Sometimes the most beautiful solutions come from working with constraints, from finding creative ways to turn limitations into features. I finished the crane and placed it on her desk. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need here, she said, picking up the crane and examining it carefully. When can you start? But more than the job offer, more than the career opportunity, what stayed with me was the reminder of how profoundly we can impact each other's lives, often without even knowing it. Daniela had no idea when she taught a scared 8-year-old boy to fold paper cranes that she was giving him the tools he would need to build his entire life. And I had no idea when I helped a frightened little girl on an airplane that I was reconnecting with the person who had saved me decades earlier. That night, in my hotel room, I folded a paper crane and thought about the invisible threads that connect us all. I thought about teachers and students, about the art of transformation, about how sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from grand gestures, but from simple acts of creation and care. I thought about Nancy, who would grow up learning that her hands could make beautiful things, that her mind could focus and achieve, that even in moments of fear and chaos, there was always something lovely she could create. And I thought about Daniela, who had been reminded that the seeds she planted in young hearts continued to bloom long after she thinks her work is done. Over the following months, as I settled into my new job at Daves & Associates, I stayed in regular contact with Daniela and Nancy. I would send them photos of my latest origami creations, and they would send me pictures of Nancy's growing collection of paper animals and flowers. Daniela had thrown herself back into origami with the enthusiasm of someone rediscovering a lost passion, and Nancy was proving to be an eager and talented student. "She's like a different child," Daniela told me during one of our phone calls. "The anxiety is still there, but now she has a tool to manage it. When she starts to feel overwhelmed, she asks for paper, and she folds until she feels calm again. It's given her confidence too," she continued. "She started showing her creations to other kids at school, teaching them simple folds. For a child who is so withdrawn and fearful, seeing her take on a teaching role is incredible." I understood that transformation intimately. The act of creating something beautiful, of mastering a skill that others admired, had been the foundation of my own journey from anxious child to confident adult. 6 months after our reunion, Daniela called with exciting news. "I've been asked to develop a curriculum," she said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "The school district wants me to create a program that uses art therapy techniques to help children with anxiety and trauma. They want to pilot it in 3 elementary schools next fall." "That's amazing," I said. "You're going to help so many kids." "I was wondering," she said, "if you might be interested in being a guest instructor sometimes. I know you're busy with your new job, but I think the children would benefit from hearing your story, from seeing what's possible when someone gives you the right tools at the right time." I didn't hesitate. I'd be honored. The first time I visited one of Daniela's classes, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since that job interview. Standing in front of a group of 8-year-olds, many of whom reminded me painfully of my younger self, I felt the weight of responsibility to get this right. "Who can tell me what this is?" I asked, holding up a square of origami paper. "Paper," several children called out. "That's right, but what else could it be?" The children looked puzzled, so I began to fold. As the crane took shape in my hands, I saw their expressions change from confusion to wonder to excitement. "It's a bird," one little girl exclaimed. "It is," I said, "but 5 minutes ago, it was just a flat piece of paper. What changed?" "You folded it," a boy in the back row said. "I did, but more than that, I saw something in that paper that wasn't visible yet. I imagined what it could become, and then I used my hands and my patience to make that vision real." I looked around the room at their faces, some eager, some skeptical, some withdrawn and fearful. That's what we're going to learn to do today. We're going to learn to see possibilities where others see limitations. We're going to learn that our hands can create beautiful things and that our minds are capable of amazing transformations. As I taught them their first simple folds, I thought about the circle of influence that had brought me to this moment. Daniela had taught me, I had taught Nancy, and now we were all teaching a new generation of children that they had the power to transform not just paper, but their own sense of what was possible. "The most important thing about origami," I told the class as they worked on their cranes, "isn't making perfect folds. It's learning that you have the power to take something ordinary and make it extraordinary." Every time you fold a piece of paper, you're proving to yourself that transformation is possible. One little boy who had been struggling with his folds and growing frustrated looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Mine doesn't look right," he said. I knelt down beside him, seeing myself in his frustration and self-doubt. "Can I tell you a secret?" I said quietly. "When I was your age, I was scared of everything. I thought I was bad at everything." "Really?" he asked. "Really. And you know what? Your crane is beautiful because you made it. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine to be perfect." I helped him with the final folds, and when his crane was complete, his face lit up with the same pride and wonder I remembered feeling all those years ago. After the class, as the children filed out clutching their paper cranes, Daniela and I stood together in the empty classroom. "You were wonderful with them," she said, "especially with Marcus, that little boy who was struggling. You knew exactly what he needed to hear." "I was him," I said simply. 20 years ago, I was sitting in a classroom just like this one, feeling like I couldn't do anything right. If I can help even one of these kids discover what I discovered, then everything comes full circle." "You know," Daniela said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about something you said on the airplane, about how Origami taught you that transformation is always possible. What about it? I think that's the real lesson we're teaching these children. Not just how to fold paper, but how to believe in their own capacity for change and growth. How to see that no matter how flat or ordinary they might feel, they have the potential to become something three-dimensional." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It's a metaphor for resilience, isn't it? For the idea that we can take the raw materials of our lives, even the difficult parts, and fold them into something meaningful. Exactly. And that's a lesson that goes far beyond art class. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the profound interconnectedness of our stories. A scared child, a patient teacher, a simple piece of paper, and 20 years later, a new generation of children learning that they had the power to transform not just paper, but their own sense of what was possible. The paper crane sat on my dashboard, a small reminder of a profound truth, that we are all connected by invisible threads of kindness, that the love we give to others has a way of finding its way back to us, and that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that bring us full circle to where we started, but with new eyes to see the beauty that was always there.
In the end, Origami had taught me its greatest lesson, that transformation is always possible, that beauty can emerge from the simplest materials, and that with patience, care, and the right guidance, anything can be folded into something magnificent. But more than that, it had taught me that we all have the power to be teachers and students simultaneously, to pass on the gifts we've received while continuing to learn and grow ourselves. The scared little boy who had learned to fold paper cranes had become a man who could teach others to do the same. And in that teaching, in that sharing of knowledge and hope, the circle of transformation continued, one fold at a time, one child at a time, one moment of patient kindness at a time. An absolutely beautiful story about the lasting impact teachers have on their students and how kindness creates ripples that span decades. What do you think of the way Nick's childhood teacher shaped his entire life through such a simple act? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this heartwarming story about the power of teaching, the healing nature of art, and the beautiful way life brings us full circle, please show your support by hitting that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more inspiring stories that celebrate human connection. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.